Hi everyone, how are you doing today? If you are new to this channel, my name is Marion H. and I make book reviews and poetry readings and occasional music performances, but mostly I focus on classic literature, old books, and occasionally history and nonfiction. So if you're new, thanks for joining and hope you can stick around. I found this tag on a blog called The Edge of the Precipice, run by Rachel, and it's called the Give Thanks book tag. And I knew I wanted to do this on my blog, but I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do this on the YouTube channel as well? So here we are with our Thanksgiving themed setup and a whole stack of books here that I can't wait to share with you. So let's get started. The first question is, or the first prompt is, a book you're grateful to a friend for recommending. So I found two that I wanted to talk about quickly. First one is Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. This being one of the great Russian classics of the 19th century, really a cross-section of different generations, different movements, and things that were concerning people at the time. But more than that, it's just a really great story about this family and about these younger men and these older men coming to terms with changing society. And I just really enjoyed this book. This was recommended to me by Julia on Goodreads. So thank you, Julia. I need to read it again, but I just remember really liking this one. The other book that was recommended to me is Rings of Saturn, or The Rings of Saturn. This author specifically was recommended to me by Blaj, who was one of my earliest subscribers and good friends. And this was a great read. I had heard of Sebald before, but I'd never picked him up. And it's sort of a travelogue, but it's sort of a nonfiction exploration of different topics, different events in history, and how little things from these different places and these different events connect with each other. There's just a lot in it. It's hard to summarize, but I definitely recommend checking this out. You know, if you've heard of Sebald or just I'm not sure if you're going to like it, I would at least give him a try. His style is very, very unique and makes use of photographs as well. So I'm really glad I read this and learned a lot too. Next question is a book that fires your imagination. A lot of books, obviously. I think that's one of the primary reasons to read, is to get your imagination fired up. But one that I always go back to from time to time is, no pun intended, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. This is with the 3D cover from Vintage Classics, and it came with this 3D glasses thing. Anyway, a little gimmicky, but it's still really fun. The Time Machine was something I read as a teenager, and I was just really captivated by this story. It's certainly very dated, certainly got some weird stuff in it, but I still enjoy reading it to this day. I think what I love so much about it is it's told in sort of a flashback style, narrated by the time traveler. And there's just a lot of nostalgia in this book. It's not like some of Wells's other books, which take place more in the moment. This is very much a book of nostalgia. It's it's either a long short story or a short novella. The ending is quite sad. So, I don't know. I feel like this is a book that really struck my imagination. For those of you who are not aware, this takes place in the Victorian era, and this is about a guy who travels to the future where the earth is divided, as it says here, between the gentle, ineffective Eloi and the ape-like Morlocks, forward again by 1,000,000 years or so to glimpse the dying world of blood-red beaches and menacing shapes. Anyway, the primary plot here takes place in this era with the gentle, weak race of Eloi and the dominant, materialistic Morlocks, who also are cannibals. So you can imagine how that goes. Yeah, this really struck a chord with me as a teenager, and I still enjoy The Time Machine. Let's see. So a book with a vivid setting. I'm going to go with Alice in Wonderland. This is the original edition that I read as a child, so it's very, very special to me. And in part, I suppose it's vivid because of the wonderful illustrations by John Tenniel, which are as much part of the book and a part of the Alice myth, if you will, as the writing itself. But I do enjoy the writing, and I enjoy the illustrations and the songs. And yeah. Alice in Wonderland has had a huge impact on, I would say, both fiction and art and all kinds of mediums. And I love this book. It's one of those that's very capable of fully engrossing you in the place that it's showing you, even though it's fantasy. I just really enjoy it. So yeah, Alice in Wonderland. Also, I think I may like Through the Looking Glass a bit more. I think I've mentioned that before. Yeah, Through the Looking Glass is also an excellent read. Now on to some nonfiction. So the next question was an encouraging book. Guess I tend to go towards nonfiction for encouraging books. And this one is a collection of writings by the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard was a Christian philosopher. So this particular volume is called Spiritual Writings, and it basically takes excerpts from different things he's written. And this cover, I think the cover is a little bit strange, but certainly eye-catching. Some of these pieces too you'll find in a larger collection called Provocations, which I also really want to get. But just to give you a taste of what this entails. So part 1 is called The Gift. Every good and every perfect gift is from above. And so these essays focus on that concept, that scriptural concept. The next part is Creation, what we learn from the lilies and the birds. One of the best pieces in this work, which is also part of Provocations, is this chapter called Be Satisfied with Being Human. And in this chapter, or is it in this chapter? It's in one of these chapters. Yes, he tells a story actually called The Lilies of the Field, and it's about this little bird and this lily and what happens when the lily becomes discontent with being a lily. Anyway, it's really great. And then part 3 is Love at the Feet of the Savior. So some of these are easier to read than others. I would recommend just reading whatever looks interesting to you and not necessarily in a particular order. But I love Kierkegaard. I find him to be one of the most encouraging writers outside of the Bible, especially if you, of course, are a Christian. So yeah, this is great. Next one is a book that taught you something. So I could have just picked another Kierkegaard book for that, but I'm going to go with another nonfiction, and this is 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. Here's a nice blurb from Churchill. 7 Pillars of Wisdom ranks with the greatest books ever written in the English language. As a narrative of adventure, it is unsurpassable. So really, if you're not familiar with Lawrence or Lawrence of Arabia, it's about this young man who goes to the Middle East during or right before the outbreak of World War I, and due to his unique place there, his connections, and most of all his vast knowledge and command of the languages, he ends up becoming the de facto leader of the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And I also did a whole blog series on this book, which I can link to in the description. But I learned a lot about the history of the time, and this is all narrated first person by Lawrence, by the way. I learned a lot about the history of the time, but I think what I learned most of all was the reality of war and how this guy just developed from an initially very idealistic, you might even say arrogant young man, and through his experiences and through the things he suffered, he developed this great wisdom, I suppose you could say, this insight and this wisdom about the reality of war and the reality of politics and nation building and all those things that still haunt us today. So it's a long one, but I found it really good. I think it's good to take it part by part because it's divided up into parts. And yeah, I think it's well worth the read. There is a shorter version called Revolt in the Desert. So if you want to read an abridged version, there's like an official abridged version. But I think you may miss out on some things. So yeah, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, a book still relevant for today, and it's taught me a lot about history and politics and people. All right, moving on from such heavy topics to a happy book. So I ended up going with Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. This is also the original copy I read when I was a youngster, and I just remember enjoying this so much. A fastidious English gentleman makes a remarkable wager. He will travel around the world in 80 days or forfeit his life's savings. Phileas Fogg and his faithful manservant Jean Passepartout embark on a fantastic journey into a world filled with danger and beauty. From the exotic shores of India, where the heroic... Okay, no, I'm not going to say anymore. Okay, some of these, just some books in general, just give everything away. Do not read the back of that, okay? Anyway, it's a delightful, lighthearted book and pretty light on the science too. So if Jules Verne kind of intimidates you for his techno babble, you may enjoy this one a lot more. Again, very lighthearted, not super heavy or anything, but it's just fun. So yeah, Around the World in 80 Days. The next question was an amusing book. And for this, I decided to go with another classic, which I'm sure a lot of you have come across at some point, but it's 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. I think the best way to describe this is if you can imagine YouTubers living in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and they decide to go on a boat ride. And the narrator is ostensibly sort of a travel guide, or attempting to be. But this series, or rather these 2 books, well, I'll focus on the first one. The second one was okay, but it wasn't as good, honestly. The 3 Men in a Boat is just a series of calamities and funny things that happen to these guys on this boating expedition. Denounced as vulgar by the literary establishment, 3 Men in a Boat nevertheless caught the spirit of the times. I mean, when they say vulgar, they don't actually mean how we would say vulgar. This would just not have been considered high literature back in the day. But I've read it a few times, which is saying something, because I almost never reread books. And this is just delightful to read. It's fun to read to yourself. It's fun to read to other people. Yeah, there are some dated parts, but by and large, it's aged pretty well. So that's 3 Men in a Boat. Very amusing indeed. The next one, or the next question was, a new to you book or author you discovered this year. So again, this is one I did a video on earlier, but this is Hermann Hesse's Beneath the Wheel. I really liked this one a lot. It was a 4-star book from me. And if you'd like to hear more about it, definitely check out that video. I called it a dark academia novel because it's about a young man who is struggling at his school and the pressures thereof, and pressures from his family and his village to do well at the school. And he gets burned out, as so many do. I will say, so I also read Steppenwolf by Hesse, which I didn't really like, but he's one of those authors I'm going to be looking out for in the future, and we'll be reading more of his books, I'm sure, because I just really liked this one. And I'd put it off for years, but I'm kind of glad I did in one sense, because it was very enjoyable. But if you're thinking about reading this, I would definitely go ahead and give it a shot. All right, a fictional character you feel a kinship with. I really waffled a lot on this one. I could think of a few that I really liked, or characters I could relate to, such as Lucy Snow from Villette. But as I thought about the question more, I thought maybe it's really asking you, like, what characters do you feel related to? Not necessarily you being the character, but a character you feel this connection to. So, yeah, with that in mind, I had to go with Mishkin from The Idiot. And this is not Mishkin. This is a painting that plays a important or pivotal moment in the book. It's a picture of Jesus, actually. I think I've mentioned this before, but The Idiot is about this young man who has been away for some time in Switzerland. He suffers from epilepsy. He comes back to Russia. He's a very idealistic young man, trying to see the best in people, trying to help people, frankly. And that doesn't go so well. So I really loved that character. I think the book was only like a 3-star book at the time, but this character has really haunted me, and I feel very, very close to Prince Mishkin. I want to read this excerpt that has often come back to me over the years. This is still, I guess, fairly early in the book. He's describing his life in Switzerland when he was convalescing, and it says, I was restless. I didn't know, however, I should manage to support life. You know, there are such moments, especially in solitude. There was a waterfall near us, such a lovely thin streak of water, like a thread but white and moving. It fell from a great height, but it looked quite low, and it was half a mile away, though it did not seem 50 paces. I loved to listen to it at night, but it was then that I became so restless. Sometimes I went and climbed the mountain and stood there in the midst of the tall pines, all alone in the terrible silence, with our little village in the distance, and the sky so blue and the sun so bright, and an old ruined castle on the mountainside far away. I used to watch the line where earth and sky met, and longed to go and seek there the key of all mysteries, thinking that I might find there a new life, perhaps some great city where life should be grander and richer. And then it struck me that life may be grand enough even in a prison. I think that quote just summarizes his character so well. I won't say anything more, but I really do enjoy that deeply psychological aspect to the character and to The Idiot. So that is one I will be rereading. And then finally, the last book is one that you want to share with others. And again, hard to choose just one, right? And it gets to the point where I want to choose books I haven't talked about before. I mean, obviously, I have great affinity for Eugene Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. I really loved The Painted Veil by W. Somerset Maugham. All these books I've talked about ad nauseum. And so I thought, why don't I talk about The Man Who Was Thursday, A Nightmare by G.K. Chesterton. I may have mentioned this before, but I'll just read the blurb on the back. Chesterton's surreal masterpiece is a psychological thriller that centers on 7 anarchists in turn-of-the-century London who call themselves by the names of the days of the week. Chesterton explores the meanings of their disguised identities in what is a fascinating mystery and ultimately a spellbinding allegory. Now, if you've heard of Chesterton, I'm sure you associate him with religious writing primarily, maybe some essays. And there is certainly a religious undertone to this book, but it really doesn't show up till the last chapter. And it took me, I think, 3 readings of this to even grasp what he was trying to get out in the last chapter, because it gets wild. Really, most of the book is indeed a thriller, a mystery, a very quirky story with, I would say reminiscent of Sherlock Holmes, maybe a bit of Alice in Wonderland, just due to the sheer randomness of some of the things that happen. So yeah, I think that this book should be read more. And I wouldn't say you have to be religious to like it. I know that when I first read it, I didn't even get the last chapter and I didn't care for it that much, but I still enjoyed the book and it left an impression on me such that I read it again and again. So yeah, The Man Who Was Thursday, it's weird, it's spooky, it's funny, it's highly underrated in my opinion. And here's a blurb from C.S. Lewis, if that didn't convince you. A powerful picture of the loneliness and bewilderment which each of us encounters in his single-handed struggle with the universe. But again, it is a very funny book, so even though it has that gravitas in it, you can still enjoy it as a story. So yeah, that is all I had for this book tag. I will put the questions in the description and also link to Rachel's blog. Definitely check her blog out for more great tags and book-related events in the blogosphere. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I will see you soon.